Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Mungeon. I'm the Research and Instruction Librarian assigned to working with this section of English 102 for spring quarter. So I think you probably heard a million times by now how unusual this quarter is for everyone. And this is not going to be any different than that. This is normally one or two lectures that I give in this class. And I think that we've sort of discovered that it's a little bit complicated to try to do that, especially synchronously with us all at the same time. And so what we're doing instead is this is going to be a relatively short video lecture just explaining some of the ins and outs of doing research in the libraries, especially doing it remotely. And the important things that you need to know to succeed in this class and future classes as well, using the library for your research and sort of learning needs as well. And so, again, my name is Michael Mungeon. My email address is on the screen. It is munchin@uw.edu. In fact, in many ways, that's kind of the most important takeaway from this lecture is I want you to feel very free to get in touch with me if you need any help with anything that we talk about, anything with your Canvas assignment, or any research that you're doing for this class or any class. And I'm also happy to meet through Zoom, which you can email me and we'll set that up as needed. So let's get started. Actually, before you get started, there are a couple things you want to make sure you have set up. And so, since we're all working remotely this quarter, because spring quarter campus is more or less closed, you have to make sure that all of your off-campus access settings are set up correctly. And there's a couple things you have to do to make sure that that's right. First is you should have your UW Net ID set up. And you most likely, if you've taken College 101, you've most likely already done this. And if you need help retrieving your Net ID and password, which is different than your Cascadia ID, I just want to emphasize that, it's different. If you need help retrieving that or setting that up, please go to the link that is posted on your screen. Cascadia has a page for that. And the second thing you need to make sure that you set up is called Husky on Net. It's what we call a proxy piece of proxy software. So basically, what it does is so we have databases and resources that belong to our institution, our campuses, UW, Bothell, and Cascadia, and we pay for those resources, and so people can't access them for free. And normally how they track your access is the IP address that you're using, which is the location of your IP address. It tells people the location of your computer at that time. And campus has a set of IP addresses that are recognized. So you're not on campus right now. And so you have to install this piece of software to make sure that those paywalls that you would run into, you don't run into. So it recognizes you as someone who has access to that. So that's what that's what proxy software does, is that it more or less tricks a database into thinking that you are in fact on campus. But it's basically you communicating to the database that you in fact have access to that database. So you need to make sure that that is set up. The instructions for doing that are on that link that I also have posted on this slide. So, goals for today, or for this video. All of these things are going to be relatively brief, and again, they're going to be fleshed out in your Canvas assignment, but I just want to share a few things, a few perspectives about the research process. We're going to talk a little bit about evaluating the quality and usefulness of sources. That's going to be really important to you for this class and for any class, and just in life. Evaluating sources is incredibly important, especially in this era of fake news and in this era of sort of not necessarily accountability for truth, for telling the truth, right? And so we're going to talk a little bit about what are some shortcuts for being able to evaluate the quality and usefulness of sources. So we're going to briefly discuss scholarly and peer-reviewed articles. You've probably heard that phrase before, peer-reviewed articles. You're often asked to find peer-reviewed articles. And we're going to talk about what that means and why you should care about what that means. Importantly, we're going to talk about where to start your research. We're going to focus on UW Library Search, which is our library catalog, and we might talk a little bit about some background sources and other databases available to you as well. And then I'm going to briefly introduce the Canvas assignment, which is going to go live on week 5, I believe, which is the week of May 4th, I believe. Okay. So before we get started, I think it's really important to lead with this. And I've actually never done this in a class before, but I think I've been thinking a little bit about how, like I said before, the librarian shows up to 1 or 2 class sessions for this class every quarter, and you all don't necessarily know who I am. You don't know where I'm coming from. And so you might be asking, who is this guy anyway? Like, why is this librarian randomly telling us things about how to use the library? Like, what is his background? How do I know if I can trust this guy? Well, I think that's a great question, and I think I should get into it a little bit because this is going to come into play later, but when you're evaluating sources, one of the things you're going to have to look at really closely is perspective. Where is someone coming from? What biases might they have? What is informing their opinions, or why might they be telling you something, right? And so looking into someone's perspectives in that way, or their various identities, their various demographics, can tell you, it can contextualize why they might be telling you something. And so I think it's important to do that for me as well, so that you know where I'm coming from. So, first and foremost, I am, well, not necessarily foremost, but I am black, or I also identify as African American. I think that the way that people of color and black people move through the world is sometimes different than the way that other races move through the world. And that informs how we see the world, that informs our perspectives, and it's important to talk about that. I grew up in South Seattle. My family was lower middle class. We did not have a lot of money, but we were not destitute. So I'm not necessarily coming at it from like a perspective of someone who has inherited a lot of wealth, or who has come from several generations of college attendees. Actually, my mom was the first person in our line to go to college, and so that also informs my views on various information sources and higher education as well. I have a bachelor's of science in psychology from the University of Washington, as well as a master's of library and information science, both from University of Washington Seattle campus. I got those in 2006 and 2010, respectively. So my background is in both psychology and in libraries, which is perfect because I'm actually the psychology librarian here at UW. I moved to rural Virginia for 7 years after grad school to be a librarian down there. I was tenured faculty at a university called James Madison University in Harrisonburg, Virginia. And I actually moved back to this area for specifically for this job. And so I think it's important to mention that I'm not sort of stumbling around or sort of lucking into things, or falling into things is a better way to put it. Like, this is a very specific job that I wanted to have. I wanted to have to interact with both students at UW, Bothell, and Cascadia. And that's actually one of the big features of this job for me. I do identify as being a part of the LGBTQ plus community. Sort of like being black and African American, it does inform how you move through the world and how you interact with things in the world. And it's also important to mention that. And in many ways, most importantly, I am in this job and I'm in this position specifically because I think information is an equalizing and democratizing force in society. I think that access to information changes lives and saves lives, and being shut out of access to information can do the exact opposite. And I think that in many ways, the coronavirus pandemic that we're living through right now is sort of highlighting the importance of having access to information, having access to accurate information, and knowing how to interpret that information. Right? Knowing not only are your sources good, but what do you do with the information that you have? And so that is absolutely crucial to my practice of librarianship. And I am very distrustful of people who hide information away from people or who lie about things. And so that's where I'm coming from. And hopefully that provided some context for you for what you're about to hear from me. So this is all also to say that where I'm coming from doesn't have to be where you're coming from. You can push back on anything. You can be coming at things from a very different perspective. My perspective does not trump yours. It is not more valid than yours. But I'm going to talk about perspectives that I've gleaned from years on this job and from working in this library. All right. Oh, and that's me. So why didn't I go into all that? I actually just explained that, didn't I? Okay. So that's me. Email me if you have any questions. You have a face and a name. Yes, please get in touch with me if you have any trouble or any questions or any issues you want to talk through. Okay, so I'm going to get started talking about the research process. And I'm going to show a few images that I think sort of illustrate a few concepts about or a few ideas surrounding the research process. I think when people think about success, it does look a little bit like the straight line on the left, where you think you start from the bottom and you just make a steady march toward the top. And I think that that's not an accurate way of looking at success. I think it looks a lot more like the picture on the right, which is an arrow that has all of these sort of squiggly lines in it and detours, and it crisscrosses and it's moving backwards on itself and that kind of thing. Success involves a lot of doubling back. Sometimes you have to do work that you thought you'd already finished. Sometimes you have to edit or recalibrate or change the focus of what you're working on in order to achieve success. And so I don't want you to think that if you didn't go from just start to finish in a straight line that you've done something wrong. That's actually what it usually looks like. Specifically when we're talking about research, I think another way of looking at it is with this model. And so some of you might have, normally in an in-person class session, this is when I like to talk to you about if this rings true with you. And you can feel free to email me if this model of the research process rings true to you. But you think of it sort of as you start with your topic, like on the far left, and then you're constantly moving to the right. You've got a literature review, then you form a research question, then you do the research, and then you share it somehow. You publish a paper, or you turn in an assignment, or you do a presentation in class, or whatever. And that is often how people talk about the research process, that you're moving in this straight line. But I invite you to consider those discussion questions at the bottom of the page as well. You might have been exposed to this model before, or this idea of how the research process works. I think it looks a little bit more like this. And so you see these, this is called the WHISPER model. I can never remember what that acronym stands for, but those dots, those colored dots, sort of represent similar ideas to what you saw on the previous page. And so you start on the left with your topic, you choose a topic, and then you might move to the right until you get to the end, your search closure section. But you'll see that the arrows are very different. So any section of that research process could move backwards or forwards to any other section of the research process. And so you might choose a topic, and then you get really, really far in collecting information, formulating your focus, refining your information, and you might think you're ready to present something. But then you realize that you're missing some vital information or some questions can't be answered, and you might have to circle all the way back to the topic selection phase to refocus your topic to make sure that you're actually able to present a well-organized paper that sets out what you're trying to set out to do, if that makes sense. And so you might end up adjusting your topic pretty late in the research process, and you might have to do a little bit more research to make up for that disparity. And so, again, I really want This looks like a kind of like a complicated model, but I really want to emphasize that this is what success looks like. This is if you're doing research and you find that you feel like you're doing work that you've already done, or like, oh, I have to go now to do this extra research. I thought I had finished my topic, but now I added this thing, and I've got to go research that. That's good. That's what research is supposed to look like. And if you want to do research, both in future classes or as a job or as part of your job, which it is for a lot of people, I think you have to get used to the process of doubling back, of reiterating things that you've already done, and refining things that in order to make them better. So this is a an activity I like to do in class when we meet, about refining your topics, making sure that they are researchable or that they are what you want them to be. And we can't do this because it involves a kind of a think, pair, share activity involving discussing a partner, and so you can't share out. But I am still showing you the slide because I want you to think about these questions. And if you want to chat with or email with another student in the class and exchange information about these, because in many ways, your classmates are your best resource because you're all in the same boat. You're all doing the same assignments, and you're all doing looking for very similar types of information. And so you have unique insight from sort of in the trenches, as it were, about how to do this assignment in a meaningful way and in a way that produces something good. And so ask yourselves, what does your topic look like right now? What are you happy with? What are you not happy with? What kinds of information do you still need? Does your topic feel like it's the right scope, or might it be too narrow or too broad? Think about that. Run it by your classmates if you want to, and help each other out with that. Okay, so one of the most important things that we're going to talk about in this video lecture is source evaluation. Specifically, how to determine if you trust a source enough to use it. So how do you determine a source? How do you personally determine if you can trust a source? There aren't really any wrong answers. I just want you to think about that question for a second. You can pause the video if you want to take a second, but I'm going to move forward. The shorthand that I like to use and that librarians often use is called the crap test. We're trying to determine if, in other words, if a source is crap. And that is an acronym standing for currency, aka is the source current and up to date, and how important even is it for it to be up to date? Like if you're studying Shakespeare, you don't need anything written in the last 5 years. Shakespeare was writing 500 years ago, right? And so that might, like, currency might mean something different in that context. You might want modern interpretations, but it's less important in that case than it might be for like medical research, where up-to-date information could mean life and death. The R stands for reliability, which is getting at a number of things. Does it appear to be well written and edited? Does it appear to be reputable? Does it cite its sources? That's a really important thing. You know, if it's citing its sources, you know it's less likely that they're simply making things up or fudging the truth. And citing sources also gives you a way of verifying their claims and sort of following the breadcrumbs that they follow in doing their research. Authority is what the A stands for. Who wrote it? Who published it? Who produced it? Do they have the expertise? Do they have any business writing on this topic? Right? And was it peer reviewed? And so, circling back to what we were talking about earlier, peer review is a process in which experts in a field determine the validity of a source. Did they draw the right conclusions? Did they include the right sources in their bibliography or their works cited? Are they appropriately credentialed to do this research? Did they have the right methods in their research? That kind of thing. That's what peer review. That's what peers do in the peer review process. And that's important because that creates a higher standard for publication. And so that's why we talk about peer review as being this very high standard, and why we ask people to find peer reviewed articles. It's because peer reviewed articles have gone through a pretty rigorous process of double checking, dotting I's, crossing T's, and just really holding people to account. Do you have any business putting out what you've put out? I just want to re-emphasize, though, that peer review is not a perfect process. There are many examples of things that were peer reviewed that ended up being completely wrong and had to be retracted. So there is no perfect process. We like to talk about peer review as being this incredibly high standard, which it is, but it's not a perfect standard. So keep in mind authority as well. And the P stands for perspective. Whose point of view is being represented? Are there biases and assumptions present? There are always biases present. Don't ever let anyone tell you that they're unbiased. There's no such thing. Biases are always present. Sort of like what we talked about in my Who Am I slide. The conclusions that I draw come from my experience in those different aspects of my life. And so bias is always going to be there. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, but you have to be mindful of it. And draw your own conclusions, right? And the last one I put is follow the money, which is a really, really important thing to consider. Oftentimes, like if you've ever used Facebook or any social media, then you see information that looks very interesting, and then you look up in the corner and it says sponsored by so and so. So that tells you right there that whatever you're about to look at is trying to present someone in a positive light. Nobody sponsors an ad that makes them come across negatively, right? And so keep that in mind. Who is paying for this research to exist? Who is paying for this information to exist out in the world, right? Because they can't necessarily be trusted to be objective. In fact, they can be trusted not to be objective. They have an investment in that information, right? And so the interesting thing about each of these kinds of categories of, or I'm sorry, criteria for evaluating sources is that again, there's really no wrong answers. It's all contextual. Sometimes you want information that is incredibly current, for example, and sometimes it doesn't matter how current it is. It's just not that type of information. Sometimes you want information that is attempting to be a very specific point of view, like an op-ed in a newspaper is writing from a point of view. The bias is right there, right? And op-eds are important. You need them to inform people's opinions and allow people to make up their minds using different perspectives outside of their own, right? But sometimes you don't want something in your newspaper to be espousing a really specific point of view or really specific perspective or bias, because it can kind of cloud the information and contextualize that information in a way that most people might see in a sort of distorted manner. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but I don't think I have to explain why sometimes you might not want too much bias in a newspaper. But just a few things to consider. These are all contextual depending on the type of information that you are looking for and are reading. All right. So normally what I'd have you do is this source evaluation activity, which I really, really love, and students usually get a lot out of it. I can't have you do it because it involves interacting with people sort of on the fly, face to face, and we've had no luck trying to replicate it in breakout rooms on Zoom. And so I'm just going to leave it up here for a second in case you want to do it for yourself. The resource evaluation activity it's still in the Canvas. It is entirely optional. If you want to get some practice evaluating different types of sources, I would strongly recommend you take part in this. It's a good short activity to demonstrate some of the things I just talked about in case any of that was confusing. So I'm just going to display the instructions for a few seconds on each page in case you want to try this for yourself, which I emphasize again, totally voluntary. But the way the activity would normally work is that I would have you look at different sources, which are available in that resource activity link, and then I would imagine these different scenarios for using those sources, and then I have you use the CRAP test and apply those standards, those criteria, to determine in each scenario if that text or if that resource might be useful to you. And the answer changes depending on the context of your scenario. Just a spoiler alert. But if you want to see how that works, please seek out that resource evaluation activity in the Canvas under week 5. And those are the instructions. And I think the instructions are in the link in Canvas as well. But we can't do that, unfortunately, today. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is a little bit more in depth about scholarly articles and peer review. And actually, now that I look at my slide, I think I've already covered this with some degree of detail. And so I'm not going to play this video here because it's in the Canvas assignment, but normally I would play it in class. But this is a fantastic 3-minute video that explains peer review in a way that I hope demonstrates why you should care. It's a very quick introduction that talks about the peer review process, the flaws in the peer review process, what your place is in the peer review process. And I would strongly recommend you watch it. In fact, it's part of your assignment to watch it, and so I will not play it here, but the link is there at the bottom if you want to watch it now, or if you want to wait till you do the Canvas assignment, you can watch it then. So you can't answer that first question yet because you haven't watched, unless you've watched the video. How do those relate? How does the peer review video relate to source evaluation? But I want you to think about that question after you've watched the video. But let's talk briefly about how you can tell if an article is scholarly or peer reviewed, because you will, I guarantee you, if you are in a class with any sort of research component, you will be asked to find peer reviewed articles with some frequency. And so there are a couple of shorthands. One, if you use databases like our UW library search, our catalog, it'll just tell you it's peer reviewed. And this is explained in better detail in the Canvas assignment, but there will be just a line of text under the article title saying peer reviewed oftentimes. And UW Library Search lets you sort your results by peer-reviewed articles. And so you can eliminate everything that isn't peer-reviewed using a checkbox on the screen. So that's a really quick way to do it using UW Library Search. But also, if you don't have that available and you're just looking at an article in front of you, peer-reviewed articles and scholarly articles very frequently tend to have these very set sections that are just common across disciplines. They're common across subjects and across journals and across articles. They just you see these in peer-reviewed articles, and so you'll usually see an introduction, a literature review. If it's a science-related article, you'll usually see a methods or methodology section where they talk about how they did the experiment and how they analyzed the results. You'll usually see a discussion section, a conclusion section, and most importantly, a bibliography or a works cited page. It's if you don't see a bibliography at the end of the article or information you just read, it's probably not peer reviewed, because that's a standard across sort of academic disciplines, is that you cite your sources and you tell people where you got them and how you use them. Other sources don't use that. So, for example, newspapers, you don't usually see a list of works cited at the end of a newspaper article, and that's because that's not a peer-reviewed source. It's an edited source, right? And so newspapers would be an example of something that would not count as peer-reviewed. Another thing to consider is how to actually read a scholarly article once you found it. This can be a challenge because, as hinted at in the video, I believe, scholarly articles, especially peer-reviewed articles, are written by experts with the audience intended to be other experts, right? And so you're all sort of breaking into these different subjects and disciplines and learning more and more about them. And so the experts who wrote these scholarly articles weren't necessarily considering you And so they will often include jargon that you might not understand. They'll make references to researchers or theories or concepts that you haven't encountered yet. That's fine. You know, if you are reading an article in a subject that you want to pursue in the future, you will eventually get to the place where you are understanding, you know, sort of all of the ins and outs of what they're talking about in these articles. But for now, you'll have better luck if you sort of follow the bullet points on the screen right now. So first of all, it's important to remember you do not have to read an article from start to finish, uh, unless that is specifically your assignment. If you found an article that is relevant and useful, you, you do not have to just like start from the title and then plow through 30 pages. You can skim it. You can pick the sections. If you look back on the sections, you can pick the sections that are most useful to you. And so I always start with the introduction and the abstract at the beginning, which is it's sort of sets the background and it gives a summary of the article. That's really important to read first because it tells you if the rest of the article is actually relevant to what you're looking for. And then it's really I always like reading the conclusion at the end as well, because it kind of also summarizes the article in a really useful way. Everything in between, I read that if the article itself is, if the introduction and the conclusion are so compelling that I want to learn more, then I'll read the stuff in between. But otherwise, that's probably worth skimming at best. Um, yes, read the most relevant sections, skim the rest. Also, Google anatomy of a research article or how to read a research article. There are some great infographics on the internet as well. There's a great one from, I think it's North Carolina State University, on how to read a research article. They have some fantastic tips, so take advantage of those as well. And lastly, you can also use the reference tools on the library homepage. The library homepage is library.uwb.edu. And the reference tools section of that page, in fact, why don't I share my screen so you can see what I'm looking at? So this is the main library page. Is a great place to start your research. This reference tools section under resources has a lot of great tools for helping you understand complicated sort of research jargon or sort of complicated concepts that you might encounter in research articles. I especially like Gale ebooks. So what I use that for, in fact, if I have to read a paper in a topic that I'm not very familiar with, I keep Gale ebooks open in the background and I type in terms that are used that I don't know. And what that'll do is it'll give you a list of dictionaries and encyclopedias that have covered that topic. And you can read those and see some background information on that, on whatever you typed in. You can see some definitions around what you typed in, other things you should consider when researching a topic like that will pop up as well. And so it's a really, really useful tool to keep up. But these other ones do very similar things as well. Oxford Reference Online is a good one as well. And I should break in here and say, at any point, if you have any, if you're ever stuck, if you ever are not sure what to do next in the research process, please, please, please shoot me an email, and I will get back in touch with you, and we can either work it out over email or on Zoom. In many ways, Zoom actually makes it easier to solve some of these problems with the screen sharing and all of that stuff. And so feel free to reach out to me. I check my email many, many times a day. I'm happy to get back in touch with you if you have any issues with any of this, reading scholarly articles, finding scholarly articles, understanding them, any of that. And my email address again is munchin@uw.edu. Okay, so I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about, actually specifically, we just talked about Gale ebooks, but I will talk specifically about UW Library Search and how that is a really useful place for you to start your research and maybe even do all of your research. And so let me share my main screen again and go back to the home page. My connection was interrupted. Okay, so this is the UW Library homepage again. Let's just say you wanted to do some research on, let's choose women in STEM education as a example. STEM, of course, stands for science, technology, engineering, and math. Hmm. I find that it takes longer than normal because my home internet connection is not nearly as good as the campus internet connection, but it's going. Yay, we made it. Okay. I hope it doesn't take that long for you all every time you want to do a search because that's a little frustrating. Okay, so say this was a topic that you were interested in. It'll give you results that it deems most relevant to the topic that you have chosen or the search terms that you've chosen. It's important at the very beginning to log in. This is so that if you find an article that's good, and you log in with your UW Net ID that we talked about on the first, somewhere in the first couple slides, and that's because if you find an article that's good, it will link you straight to the article, but there's a paywall in between, and so if it doesn't recognize you as a person with a Net ID, then it won't let you through, and it'll block you from accessing. So that's important to do right at the beginning, so you don't have to deal with that in the moment, because it's a little annoying. And so it gives you these options for the ones that say check for online access, or online access. Those are the easiest to access because you have you can do that from home. You can connect straight to those articles. They exist virtually. You don't have to go anywhere. In this sort of new normal that we're living, this awful pandemic, you don't have access to the physical library, and we can't really provide access to any books or articles that we only own physically. And so keep that in mind. You're going to want to be looking for the options that say check for online access and not the ones that say available at a specific library, because this quarter you probably won't be able to get access to those. And so what you do with these results that you get, or what I like to do with these results I get, is actually I went through that kind of quickly. Let me go back. There's this sort of funnel icon here on the page. I like to click on that. What that means is that it's going to start refining and sorting your results. And actually, depending on your screen resolution, I think that might actually pop up normally just on the left side of the screen. But I have my screen set up in a unique way, so it didn't do that. But so first thing you might try is that you might want to say, I only want things that are available online. So immediately you've eliminated everything that you can't physically access. And so you can't read them, so they're not going to be very useful to you. So you're going to probably want to do that immediately. And then it gives you all of these other sorting options, which are so useful to you, because if you saw at the beginning, I think we had something like 400,000 results. We had hundreds of thousands of results, and far too many for you to ever hope to go through, right? And so these sorting options are incredibly important because they reduce your results down to a meaningful or a relevant and useful group of resources and not just everything. You don't want to see everything. You want to see just stuff that is relevant to what you're researching and what you're interested in. And so you might say, I am only interested in articles. You might say, I'm only interested in things from the last 5 years. These are all just examples. You can adjust the language. You can adjust the topics. And so we're looking at STEM education, right? So you might want to, and women in STEM education, so you might want to focus on issues of gender and issues facing women, for example. Um, yeah, there's a lot of options for you and a lot of ways to refine. And so if we did that, it took our results all the way down to just 12,000. And those 12,000 from what, 400,000, these are the most relevant results from what we were looking at. And so this is a much better place to start than that initial several hundred thousands page. 12,000 is still way too many to go through, and you can sort these in additional ways as you see fit. But this is that's the first thing I like to usually do is sort the results down to the most relevant ones that I can find, and then go from there. I don't want to bog you down with too many advanced tips and tricks in UW Library Search, but this is what UW Library Search is everything that we own or can easily access in our library system. And even though it's branded UW Library Search, it's encompassing most libraries in the state of Washington. We borrow and we borrow to, or we lend to and borrow from each other. And so if a book is at Seattle Central College or Western Washington University or Washington State or, Everett Community College, we can lend back and forth with each other. And if they might have something that we don't have, and they will make a copy of it, a virtual copy even, and they'll send it to us. And so you have a lot of options. You have a lot of information at a lot of different libraries available to you using this UW Library Search, which is why I'm talking about it so much and pushing it so hard. I think it's a really, really great and maybe the most efficient and easy way to do a lot of your research. And so again, that is on the main library homepage. That's library.uwb.edu, and it's just that search, that purple search bar is the UW Library Search. And any questions you have about using it, if it's not functioning the way you want it to, that's another great time to send me an email, and we can work through any issues that you're facing. The last thing I mentioned on the PowerPoint in terms of useful library search tools is the subject database, or I'm sorry, the subject databases. So databases is a term, it's kind of, speaking of jargon, that's kind of a library jargon term. It basically means a collection of information, usually surrounding a topic or a format, right? And so we have databases that are all psychology, databases that are all biology. We have databases that are all movies, that are all newspaper articles, that kind of thing. And so it's basically like a themed collection of articles on any given, from any given criteria, right? And so if you click on that databases A to Z link on the page, I went through that quickly. Databases A to Z under resources. This is everything that you have access to through our library. And so you can sort by subject. So I'm showing you this not because I expect you to go through all of these different databases, but just so you know, some things are not in UW Library Search, and it's just not possible to fit everything in there. And there are some research questions you might have that might require you to look at different subjects or different areas. Like you might be specifically looking at, let's say, math. Well, these, what did it say, four? There are four databases we have that focus exclusively on resources in math, right? And so if something's not in UW Library Search, it might be worth looking through one of these as well to see if you can find it there. I just want you to know that that is something that is available to you as a student at the moment. I'm not going to go into detail on all of these because all of these resources are a little bit different from each other. Okay, so I just want to show this image one more time. And hopefully, what we've talked about in this online lecture has provided a little bit more context for what I'm talking about here. At any stage in the process, as we talked about, it can lead to any other stage in the process. So if you're on UW Library Search and you see a bunch of articles, for example, that are related to your topic but weren't what you're planning to write about, but then you look at those articles and they're really interesting and now that's what you want to write about, it's okay to go back and change your topic or change your focus. That's what research looks like, and don't think of that as a failure. It's actually a success of the research process. And so always remember that if research takes a while and it can be kind of hard work and it requires a lot of thought and planning, and plans change, and that's okay. But if you have any questions, uh, ask me anytime. You can ask any other librarian. We have a chat service that we're basically treating it like our office hours or like our reference desk. We are staffing it through extended hours since we can't be on campus. And so, any questions you have, if you need immediate questions, you might click on that Ask a Librarian link. If you have questions that can wait for me or that are specific to me, please send me an email. And thank you for participating, and thank you for watching this video. Please be in touch if you need anything. And also, the Canvas assignment will go live the first Monday in April, I believe. And any questions you have about that as well, please let me know. But that's meant to fill in some of the gaps that we couldn't because this lecture is shorter than normal, and also we're not in person. And so, thank you so much for your kind attention. Email me if you have any questions. I'm really hitting that home. And thank you so much. Be safe.